Everybody. Welcome to our Barnes& Noble Midday Mystery event with the fabulous Katy Hays. I am
Thanks for
so
having me.
excited to see you, Katy. This is such a joy to get to do because as we discovered via email, like we are a mutual admiration society.
Oh my gosh. When I found out that you were doing this, I was beyond thrilled. It was like the best moment for me.
Well, same. When I got asked to do this, I was like, oh my God, are you kidding? I loved the cloisters and I loved saltwater. So I'm so excited to get to talk to you about it today and to share it with everybody watching with us.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I love this like beautiful intro that Barnes and Noble made for us too. I
Right?
was like, I want to watch this show, whatever
I
this is. I'm into
know. Well, it
it.
looks like a really good season of The White Lotus. I'm in,
Right.
which is kind of what the book feels like in some way, but we're going to get to that. Um, we're going to get to getting all into all the good saltwater goodness. But for those of you joining us, I am Rachel Hawkins. I am the author of The Wife Upstairs, Reckless Girls, The Villa, and my most recent release, The Heiress. Some of you also might know me from like the 10 years that I spent writing young adult novels before I decided that I wanted more murder and F-bombs in my books, I guess. And I also write as Erin Sterling. I write witchy romances under that name because you got to have balance. I joke that I've got trash men in my thrillers and really good dudes in my romances, and that's how the world should work. And Katy, who is joining us today, which, by the way, it is Katy's book birthday today. This is the actual release date for Saltwater. So even more excited to get to talk about this fabulous book. Katy Hays is a Californian writer and cake aficionado. Same on that last one.
Yep.
And well, this last two. She lives in the shadow of the Sierra with her husband and their dog Queso. In addition to writing, Katy works as an adjunct art history professor, teaching rural students from Truckee to Tecopa. Did I get that?
Yeah, that's right.
She holds an MA in art history from Williams College and pursued her PhD in art history at UC Berkeley. Her academic writing has been published by Ashgate, an imprint of Rutledge. Her fiction explores how far humans are willing to go to believe the unbelievable, strange but real worlds, and complex female friendships. Three of my favorite things. She also runs a Substack called June Gloom, where she writes about creativity, culture, in California. When not writing or eating cake, Katy is a skier, cyclist, trail runner, Eastern Sierra enthusiast, and, well, reader. Excellent. That's a busy, you've got like a very full plate, girl.
Yeah,
So,
I feel like, you got to, as you said, balance is good. A little bit of, I feel like teaching my students keep me humble.
yeah, I can imagine. I used to be a high school English teacher, so same. Like I
Yes.
remember. And Katy's first book, The Cloisters, was a huge hit. It was an instant New York Times bestseller. It was a read with Jenna pick. It was a Sunday Times bestseller. It was a Barnes and Noble pick. So, and I absolutely loved it because it was so many things that I enjoy: tarot, dark academia, a really interesting blending of genres. And so I was going to ask you sort of first, that question that we all get asked, but I think people like to hear, like, how did this all start for you? Like what got you into writing and sort of moved you from academia in some ways into commercial writing?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you leave academia and you have been in the humanities, you have no marketable skills outside of writing and potentially critical thinking. And so I had been in grad school for so long and just kind of got out into the real world for the first time and thought, oh my God, what am I going to do with myself? Like, I'm like almost 30 and I have no job experience at all. Like, all my peers who had kind of left academia had like real marketable job experiences. And so I started adjunct teaching because, of course, that was like the only thing I was qualified to do.
Right.
And I had in graduate school written all of these attempts at novels. I had like a really long commute when I was working at SF Moment. I was on the train for hours every day each way. And so I had tried repeatedly to write a book, but couldn't get past like the first two or three chapters. I kept going back and revising them. I kept expecting that I should know where the book was going, that I should, have an outline or have a sense of what the outcome was going to be. I never did. And so I never got past like the first 5,000 words of a book. And when I decided that I did not want to be like a tenure track academic, I just sat down and said, you know, like, you know how to write. You just have to every day sit down and do some words. And
Mhm.
that is how I transitioned into becoming a novelist. That first thing I wrote, I don't even want to call it a book because it was just like a project that was long enough to prove I could write 80, 70,000 words of a fiction project. And I never looked at it again. I just kind of used it as proof I could do the job. And then I started writing in earnest. And I still, after the third chapter, have no idea where my books are going.
Same, quite frankly.
That makes me feel better. I keep hoping someone will be able to teach me how to outline at some point, but it hasn't happened yet.
So, and I think that's the thing, like for a lot of authors, like when we all kind of get started, I think we all have that journey of like, I wrote 100 pages of something and then I kind of got bored with it or I didn't know what it was going to do. And so I was like, well, I'll write 100 pages of this new thing. And when we get into doing it professionally, we start realizing like, oh, that like never goes away. Like finishing a thing is really like such a key, it turns out.
Yes.
One of the hardest parts, like the hardest like sort of barrier to overcome is the like, can I finish it?
Yeah. And I feel like we all have those moments too, at least for me. I always keep a note around my desk, which is like, you lose faith in the project at X number of words. And then if I start to lose faith in the project, I'll like look for those notes on my desk and I'm like, oh, no, no. Okay. This is normal. Don't
Right.
abandon it for something else. Keep going.
Exactly. I once was like on, I think, a third book, maybe, which was just really, really hard because I was closing a series. And I had literally written on my arm in pen, the only way out is through, because I was like, that's what but I forgot I was like at a Panera when I did that. And an older lady, I live in Alabama, so like everybody's in everybody's business in the deep South. And an older lady came up to me and went, honey, I think you need a cookie. And I was like, you think I need a cookie then? So the notes are for home is what I've learned.
I mean, great. I feel like that every time someone offers you a cookie, though, you should obviously.
Yeah, I was like, that was obviously an angel from God or a witch or something telling me I needed a cookie. And she was right. And I was also right that the only way out is through. But it's a lesson I have to remind myself with. I mean, I am wrapping up edits on, I think, what, my 20th book or something. And I've just yesterday was like, I'll never finish, so it never goes away. But I think that's really interesting that I think we all kind of have that commonality of like, oh, I wanted to write, but it took me a little while to figure out how to finish a story, basically.
Yeah. I think I also had a long period of time as an academic when I took myself really seriously. I think I was insufferable. I mean, I apologize to anyone who encountered me between the ages of like 20 and 27. I like blanket apologies to everybody. And I think you have to, at a certain point, allow yourself to play and explore and be bad at something in order to finish a novel. And I think I was so horrified by the idea I might be bad at something coming out of that academic world that
they don't give you a lot of space. My husband was also in academia in the STEM side of things. And you don't get a lot of grace in that if you don't get to play as much as you do in like a creative field like this. So yeah, that makes sense. So what led you then to the story of the Cloisters, which does have a very strong art vibe running through it. So you see that connection.
Yeah, I think for me, as a reader, I have always been drawn to a novel with a dead body in it, whether the dead body is a murder that happens on the page or a more traditional Gothic haunting, wife in the attic, as you know well, or, Rebecca was sort of a formative novel for me. When I was 12 or 13, my aunt gave me 3 Daphne du Maurier mass market paperbacks for my birthday. And it is the gift that changed my life to this day. It was Jamaica Inn, my cousin Rachel, and Rebecca. And I read them and felt like my entire world was transformed. And so for me as a reader, I was always really passionate about reading a certain kind of book. And when I went and sat down to write a novel, I knew I wanted to be working in that same genre. And the Cloisters for me really felt in some ways like low-hanging fruit because I love the museum campus. No books that I had seen had really made great use of it. I had been, I teach community college kids mostly these days. And so it's always a struggle to think about what can I do to make these kids really interested in, older moments in history, older moments in art history specifically. And I had stumbled across a series of great articles on Renaissance tarot decks. So tarot decks out of the kind of late 15th century, really. And I was fascinated by them. And they were they were painted by all these artists that had these crazy little nicknames like Little Toe, Little Tom, Scary Jean. And I was just fascinated by it. And I thought, what a great setup for a novel. And so I started working on the book and, like all my books, it took a lot of revisions to get to what it was, but I really found in it the kind of story that resonated with who I was as a reader. And I think that was really what brought me there.
Yeah, and I think that that's always like the high that we're kind of chasing. And that's what I try to remind myself is that I'm always writing the book that I want to read at the end of the day, and I think for writers, I think that's such a great North Star to follow, because Lord knows if you try to follow like the market, that's not going to help you very much. So the best thing you can do is at least entertain yourself and hope that, others will come along for the ride.
Yeah. And I think also too, for me, you're from the South, I'm from California. Mm-hmm. I feel like California is so sunny and cheerful. I mean, fires, earthquakes aside, right? But I think of it as like a sunny, cheerful place. So in my books, I just long for the opposite of that. I want something like dark and dripping and kind of creepy, because honestly, I find nothing creepy about California. I'm just like, this whole place is lovely. I mean, nobody gets anything done because the weather's so nice. In my fiction, I want to travel somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I 100% get that. Yeah, because I always have the most fun, I think. I mean, I've enjoyed like books that I've set in Alabama. The book that I'm working on now is set in Alabama, but like it is really kind of fun to explore. And I think because I grew up in a place and live in a place that continues to have like a very strong Gothic tradition, like Southern Gothic is so its own thing. I like to find those like something like Reckless Girls of the Villa, the beautiful sunny places that I then infect with my Southern Gothic bent, I guess. And so now, again, we talked about the cloisters, but we're here really today to talk about saltwater, which is like, you guys, like, this is the perfect time of year to get this book because you want it in like your pool bag, your beach bag. It's just one of those that it is such a trip in every sense of that word. And so can you tell everybody, I would let you do a better job of explaining what the book is about than I will, because I'll just like be like, and they do this and they're on Capri and there's so much going on. So let you do the professional elevator pitch.
Yeah, of course. Saltwater is fundamentally a story about a family who has everything and the three women who will stop at nothing to escape them. And so it at its center is the Lingate family, who every year for their entire lifetime, even the adult's lifetime, has traveled to the island of Capri for a week-long vacation in the month of July. And they continue to do this even after 30 years ago in 1992, one of the wives of this extended family is found dead below the cliffs. And when they return 30 years later, it happens again. Another individual in their orbit is found dead on the island. And the amount of suspicion and pressure this places on the family causes them to fracture under this renewed, intense pressure. And it is about what happens as this family kind of breaks apart and what is revealed, and kind of, it's about the interplay of public and private personas. It's about long buried family secrets. I always joke that families are the cults we can't leave. Like your mom can rescue you from Nixium, right? Like she can show up and drag you out of there. But the reality is, like, it's much harder for your therapist to rescue you from the expectations of your grandparents. And so I find the family to be the most interesting unit in literature. And this is really a novel about what happens when those families are out of control, overbearing, and what you'll do to escape them in the end.
Which I loved because I love a big, because that was one of the things I really loved about this book in particular. And I mentioned it with the cloisters, that I think, you're so interesting at like blending genres because like the Cloisters has this kind of like, again, it's got the dark academia, it's got like a almost like fantasy vibe, and that, you know, in addition to being a contemporary thriller and a gothic novel in so many ways. And this one, a similar thing, it almost had that like old school, really fun, like Sidney Sheldon kind of family saga vibes, which those are the books of my youth and the books that I adore. So that made me so happy. But it also, again, it was saying very contemporary, very modern things about wealth, about, like you said, I think that's such a great way of describing his family. It's the cults you can't leave.
Yeah.
It's like I always say, I'm drawn to like a lot of toxic female friendships because A, I don't really have those in my life, thank God, like anymore at least. And B, because I find friendship is kind of my thing where I'm like, it's like the best and worst parts of a family relationship and a romantic relationship all mushed together. And so it can be difficult to extricate yourself when you know, there's not like you can't get a divorce from your friend, you can't estrange, you know. So yeah, I loved that aspect of it, the family. Why do you think it is? Like, I feel like we're in a real, like, that's like a very zeitgeisty moment right now with the kind of the corruption of these families that very much seem to have everything from the, it's all very glamorous, it's very high end, but the second you look just a little bit beneath, you see the rot. Why do you think that we're having such a zeitgeist moment with that?
I don't know. I mean, obviously, right. Like Succession is based on the Murdochs to a large extent, and this kind of the control that a family can exert, especially when that control is not just money, but in the case, I think of the Murdochs is about power too. You have this apparatus that can control so much of the world around you. I think it's true. We see it on White Lotus also right now. I mean, we have this kind of, you must feel very triggered by this Southern
I'm
family.
so triggered by the Ratliffs, Katie. You don't even like. As soon as I saw Saxon Ratliff, I was like, "Oh, I need to walk around."
Like I need to leave. This is too much. Yeah, I mean, I feel like you see these families. I mean, in White Lotus, they're on vacation, and you see the way on vacation families can just break apart. But I think we're fascinated with it right now for a couple of reasons. First, I think even somebody kind of who isn't at that level of affluence can see in these families the same backstabbing pettiness that they experience in their own family, right? So we watch Succession on the one hand for the lifestyle porn, but we also watch it because on some level we see our own parents in Logan Roy. We, you know, like our father might not have a media empire with which to batter us, but like, you know, there's probably still a set of expectations. There's probably still, you know, some mechanisms of control. And so I think a lot of it is that this family unit, no matter the level of wealth, is a relatable thing for a lot of people. And I also think it's that we love to see the fact that these people who have everything, who have the ability to control so much in their world, who can control their environment, they are also brought low by the same petty bullshit we are too. I mean, they are unable to help themselves when they push one another's buttons. You know, I mean, you get like brothers and sisters just like, you know, tagging one another and their open wounds. I mean, I'm sorry for like the gross metaphor.
No, but that's what I assume that's what it feels like to read. I don't have siblings and I didn't raise siblings. So I always joke that like I'm the person you can come to bitch about your sibling because I'm like, yeah, I'm on your team, you know, like but yeah, no, that makes so much sense. I hadn't even really thought about it that way, that it's almost like mythologizing, you know, our own like smaller problems. You put them on these kind of bigger characters, the way that like sometimes like a supernatural show, like something like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, can tell a story about like a teenage girl growing up, but because it's, you know, at this heightened level. And yeah, the mega wealthy families let us tell very relatable stories, but at a fun, hooky level. So I think that's so smart. I have a few questions now from people who have written in. So I will be glancing at my questions. And I'm going to go with Emily first. Emily wondered what your writing process was like. Do you have like a specific set of like writing hours or specific writing place? Is there something particularly inspirational in your place?
I mean, I wish there were. I will say I have to do complete drafts every time I do a revision. So I will, in the beginning of a book, I will write a lot of drafts, just trying to find the pieces of the story. And it ends up being really inefficient. And in order
Mm,
to get that work done, I think I'm the least precious person on the planet about my writing. Like, if it's 15 minutes here in between, like taking the dog for a walk and finishing teaching a class, like I will be writing words in those 15 minutes. If
mhm.
it's sitting in the car waiting to pick my husband up from somewhere, like I will be writing in those 15 minutes. I really just carve out the time wherever I can. And I feel like to that end, I don't have any one specific thing that I find particularly inspiring. I
Mhm.
actually really just love the work. It's a weird thing to say. Like I love the labor of the work. So, and I find it really, I mean, Rachel, you probably find it this way too. I find it really rewarding. And I
Oh,
think
yeah.
that that's the best thing about it. And so I'm always
Mm.
working for that reward, which comes from the writing itself as opposed to anything else.
Exactly. And I think that a lot with like, the discussions we're all having about like AI and chat GPT and all of that in writing. And I'm like, the point of this is not to have a book at the end of it. The writing is the point. Like, and yeah, if you're skipping that, then what are you doing? Like
Yeah.
that's the part you're supposed to be drawn to is the actual word. And yeah, and I love that. I'm the same where really early on because I sort of came up and I always say the Thunderdome that was YA literature in the mid 2000s. It was the same sort of thing. Like there just wasn't time and I was always very worried that like I would find some kind of I can be a little bit of a magical thinker and I was like I'm going to find some routine or some magic feather
Yeah.
and then I won't have that and then what happens, so I had to also I was like no, you've got to be super flexible. And still am. I have like an office outside the house now, like in a sort of collaborative working space. And so I go in there and some days I write a whole bunch and some days I go in there and I write, 15 words in 2 hours. And
Yeah.
play solitaire on my computer until I feel better about myself. But that's the work, you just never know. So I think
Yeah.
that's really interesting. Erin wanted to know how long did it take to write Saltwater and what was the sort of research for? Did you get to go to Capri? That's what I want to
I
know.
did. I mean, don't we, Rachel, don't we all get into writing books so that we can write off vacations in Italy?
Tax deductible vacation.
Um, yeah, that's why I got into it. That was definitely my expectation at the very beginning. I will say for some reason, well, not for some reason, for very specific reasons, this book was the hardest and the longest for me to write out of every. I've written books, I should also say, for people watching and for you, Rachel, I've written books that haven't sold too. So like I
Mhm.
have plenty of books that, I
The
wrote that
trunk
didn't end up,
books, yeah.
yeah, that didn't end up going anywhere. So I feel like out of all the books I've written, which are quite numerous at this point to me, not as numerous as you, but I feel like this was the hardest to write because it was coming on the heels of The Cloisters coming out, which was in every way a dream debut experience. It literally felt like punching a lottery ticket every day with that book. And you kind of know writing that book or experiencing that debut process that it's not going to happen again. And then also there's all of these expectations around, what the debut is. Will readers like the book? Is it going to perform well? And I had really thought that I would get Saltwater done before The Cloisters came out. And that did not happen for a myriad of reasons, some of which are like I teach full time still. So it was
Right.
for a lot of reasons I didn't get a draft done. And then I was trying to struggle this draft through in the wake of The Cloisters coming out. And it just felt impossible. And actually, I ended up in a writing group. We called it the second novel support group because we were all trying to write second novels in the wake of our first books coming out. And it just feels like such a difficult and fraught experience emotionally and creatively. And so I really found this book to be very, very hard to write. I just turned in a book last week to my editor. I wrote another book even in the interim, and those were totally fine. I did not have this kind of racked with self-doubt experience that I had with this second book. But the second book, Saltwater, I will say, was unusually hard and long for me to write.
It's second books, man. Like I remember years and years ago, like probably 15 years ago, a friend of mine and I joking that we wanted to do like a panel at some writing conference, and we were going to call it "How to Write a Second Book Without Crying." We just had to figure out how to do that first, and as soon as we figured it out, but unfortunately, no one's ever figured out how to write a second book without crying. So
No, it's true. It's impossible.
it's
The only way out is through.
way out is through, and then get a cookie because and it is. I'm really glad that you're talking about that because I think that people don't always know that, or know that like, they see like a book being a big success and they're like, oh, she's on cloud nine. And of course you were, because like that's a wonderful thing. But it also comes with this flip side of like that first book that you write feels so sort of almost like private and precious, even if you're planning on sharing it, obviously.
Yeah.
But you have all the time in the world. You're sort of following your own little pig trails wherever your heart desires. And then yeah, with the second one, you're suddenly like, oh, I have readers now, and they
Yeah.
might have expectations, and it's a whole new thing to navigate. So,
Yeah.
and that people don't understand too that like I always used to say, like, if you're writing a book a year, that's a lot. A book a year coming out is a huge amount because you're usually drafting one, editing one, and promoting a third on that kind of schedule. And that is more work than I think people realize sometimes.
It really is. And I also think too, I think as a writer, you have to learn how to write under the barrage of reader feedback. Everybody's like, don't read Goodreads. And eventually you don't. Eventually you're like, I
Yeah.
don't care. But when your
Yeah.
first book comes out, you cannot look away from it. All you want to do is see what people think about it. And I think, it's funny, after that first experience, now it does not bother me at all. I don't even think about it. But with that first book, trying to write the second, I just felt so paralyzed. And so Saltwater, I mean, it's a miracle it ever finished, to be honest.
But the amazing thing is, and this is what I love about our job, you don't see that on the page. It reads like the easiest, dreamiest book. Like you just sat down and were having a great time and blew right through it. And I've noticed that in my books that I've really struggled with are usually the ones that also just feel like, oh wow, she probably knocked that out in like 4 weeks and off she went. Not so much.
It's so true.
So that is so funny. Let's see. Oh, I love this one. This is from Pros. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. How do you know when you get like an idea for a book if it's good enough to be a novel? Like, because we've all had ideas that like it's that premise versus plot thing where you're like, oh yeah, that's really solid, but there's nothing actually there when you dig in.
A couple of things. One, I always doubt in the middle of writing a book that there's actually a book there. I usually get to around 40,000 words halfway into a book and I begin to actively question if this was even a good idea. And then there's usually, I'm sure you feel this way too, Rachel, like there's usually something else you've kind of been thinking about that's on the back burner. And suddenly you think, well, this book might not really be a book, but this other idea that I haven't even started working on, that's the banger right there. Like this other thing that I have not put months of work into is probably the thing that'll be right. So I think that there's some of that. You always have to kind of make sure that you're not just jumping ship too soon. But for me, I never know until I've written the book. I have written drafts of novels that I finished and I thought this was a novel and it's just not. It was just an idea. For me, it's a vibe, right? Like I have this idea. I'm like, there's these people and maybe they're in the desert and I don't know, they go crazy. And then I try to write that as a book and it turns out it's not a book. There's no book there. So I feel like sometimes you don't actually know until you're done with the draft and can see the structure and you have, a foundation and walls and an actual structure that works. And sometimes you get to the end and it's just not there and no amount of rejiggering will get it there.
Agreed. Yeah. And I had the book that I'm working on right now is a year late. Like I ended up pumping the brakes last year on it because like I got like halfway through or towards like editing and I was just like, this isn't it. This is not. And I told my editor, like, this is not a thing you can fix. Like I cannot be edited out of this particular. And so, yeah, it still happens. Like there are just times when, but I think part of the job is, like you said, doing the work and kind of sometimes you got to chase the butterfly that maybe doesn't go anywhere, it turns out, you know?
Did you come back to it though, Rachel? What made you come back to
I
it?
did. I had like a concept in it. Again, it was like a vibe, as you said. I was like, I want to do something about hurricanes because people forget that Alabama has a beach, a lot of it, and that we get hurricanes. And so I basically just went in and sort of like scrapped it for parts, like
Hmm.
what can I still use out of this? And so it's really interesting because it still has a lot of the same sort of like flashbacks or whatever, but it has a completely new frame story built around it. I don't recommend that, by the way. I kind of was like, I probably should have just done something completely fresh because now I've been doing that thing of basically rewriting the book every time
Yeah.
I do a draft of it. But it's there now, thank God. So yeah, I was like, sometimes you just got to take the risk and then you got to try, but sometimes it doesn't always work out. Or sometimes, like I said, you can go back and be like, okay, there's something to salvage here,
Yeah.
but sometimes not. Let's see. Helen wanted to know, do you know the ending of the book before you start, which I think we've kind of talked
Yeah.
about that, like, and do you write chronologically?
I always write chronologically. I've never been able, I know some writers can like write future scenes and
Mhm.
you have to have a plan in order to do that. And I never have a plan. So I always write chronologically. And very, very rarely know the end of a book until I get there. I often am trying to get somewhere, but I don't know how I'm going to make it work in the final
Mhm.
payoff. So yeah, if I'm lucky, I kind of have a sense of what I'd like to see happen, but often I get there and I'm completely wrong, and it's something else entirely.
Yeah, yeah. I write mostly chronologically, but I also now outline really hardcore because that is what saves me now. But by outlining, like I said, used to be an English teacher. I don't mean Roman numerals and capital letters, but just,
Rachel, I need you to teach me your ways. It would
it's
save me
it,
so much time.
sometimes it does, and then sometimes you still get in the book. That's what happened with this last one, where I was like, oh, it worked in the outline. I don't know that it's working here. But no, that I actually though only got into that because the wife upstairs was a an IP project, so
Yeah.
for hire thing, and so I was working with a team on that book, and so I had to outline, and it really changed the way I write. So I appreciate that. But I used to write way more out of order, but now I've kind of gotten a little. I maybe need to like break that up again because maybe that's what went wrong for me on the first draft of this book. Maybe I should have just been writing scenes I liked and strung them together later. So who knows? Let's see. Favorite authors, Janina would like to know. Who are some of your favorite
I
authors?
mean, well, Rachel, obviously,
Yeah.
talking to you. I mean, for me, it's funny. We talked about Daphne du Maurier earlier. I feel like a lot of my favorite authors, and that I try really hard. This is a funny story. I try really hard to only read books published before 2005 when I'm drafting because I
Okay.
find I am like a parrot. I will pick up somebody else's
Mhm.
tone, especially if I love the book. And the funny thing is that I had The Heiress like under lock and key for like several months because I was like, I want to read this, but I don't want to read it while I'm drafting. I'm saving it as like something fun and special for me. And then when I found out that you were doing this conversation with me, I just was like, I'm just going to read the first page. And then I read the whole thing in like 20
Oh,
hours. And I was like, oh, for the love of God, I'm not supposed to be doing that.
well, thank
Uh,
you.
it
That
was
always makes me
really,
happy to hear
really
because
brutal. But I would say, I try to read earlier authors when I'm drafting. So I love obviously Daphne du Maurier. This is like a really deep cut, but I really loved Victoria Holt novels when I was a
there's a
kid.
stack of Victoria Holt on this
Okay.
bookcase behind me. So yes,
Thank
you
you.
are among friends here.
Yeah, I love Victoria Holt books, and I will often pop those out of the rotation when I'm drafting. I'm a
Mhm.
big fan of Shirley Jackson for just,
Mhm.
I find her not only wonderfully dark, but low key hilarious. I recently reread The Haunting of Hill House, and I was like, this book does not get enough credit for being absolutely funny as hell. Like, it is
It is.
so funny.
It's almost like a comedy of manners. Like
Yeah.
really interesting, specific, weird people
Yeah, I
and
like
haunted house. So, like,
yes, it's dark. It's dark for sure. It's a
um,
ghost story, but like
yeah.
a haunting, but
Mhm.
really funny. And I am a big Patricia Highsmith reader too. But then I have a really varied taste. Like those are kind of my core books, but I love, like I love a really gossipy, voicey novel. So I'm a big like Jilly Cooper reader.
Oh yeah,
I
yeah.
love Riders, which I'm rereading right now.
I'm
I
reading
like
it after I watched Rivals. I was like, I'm going back to Jill
so
books.
good. I
It's
know
so
I really
good.
appreciated it when that sort of series came out because I was like, everybody can now embrace Jilly Cooper as much as I
Right.
have.
Welcome to Red Shirt,
Yeah.
everyone. Like,
And I love like Ray Bradbury. I was just reading Let's All Kill Constance the other day, which I don't know if anyone's read, but is
I
really
remember vaguely, yeah.
fun and fantastic. So I try to keep it older and then contemporary writers, obviously you. I'm a big fan of Christopher Bolin, who writes like literary suspense. Jen Silverman, who does not write suspense, but who writes like really fantastic, just literary fiction. So I don't know. I'm a very broad reader, I'd say.
Yeah, I think a lot of writers are. I think we kind of
Yeah.
have to be because like I'm always surprised by how like inspiration comes, not from like just reading books like you write. I get
Yeah.
inspiration from I'm a big nonfiction person, and that's kind of my thing when I'm drafting. I don't think I've read a single fiction novel other than Saltwater this year. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
You broke through, Katie. But yeah, I'm very similar where I like prefer not to, and
Yeah.
also you can kind of start like, it doesn't matter how well you do in this industry or whatever, you're always going to kind of be like, oh, they did it so much better than me. Or
Yes.
like, whoa, why do I even try?
I
Like,
feel like that's the thing is like it's totally unfair to other authors that you don't even know because you're pulling them into some weird comparison game.
right.
You're like,
Like,
you're either like, this is so much better. I should just give up now. Why am I even wasting my time? Or you're like, I think I could do this a little better. And you're like, they
why
didn't
didn't
ask
you
me to
do
be
this?
involved in
Yeah,
this.
exactly. That is so funny. But yeah, we all do it. I think we're all kind of guilty of that sometimes. Casey would like to know, as would I, so it's really a joint question. What is next for Katy Hays? What are you working on right now?
Oh my gosh, it's a great question. I just turned in a book to my editor, and I do not suggest having a book due 10 days before a book comes out. Like, I think that that was actually a terrible decision on my part. I should have been like, you're either going to get it in January or in June. There should have been nothing in this, 4-month period. But I just turned in a book. It is a strange, very dark, I would describe it as like a folk horror novel,
Ooh.
actually, which is kind of unusual. It's about a couple who moved to a remote Northern California town because the wife is experiencing a delusion that their dead child is actually alive. And they move to this town hoping that it will cure her. And spoiler, it doesn't. So, yeah,
Go figure. Go
yeah, go
figure.
figure.
Wouldn't that have been a nice book, though, Katie? Like,
Yeah, might make it worse.
hey. You just
We
want to
don't
say
write
the
those
problem
kind of books.
solved. That's not our jam. Like, no, you know
No.
what to do. Like, we're gonna put some people through it, basically.
Yes.
I love the sound of that. I think that's going to be like, please have them send that to me. Like, as
Yeah.
soon
Oh, I will as soon as it's done.
tell them that I want to hear about it. I have actually another question for you, which is if there was any book that like you're like, I would love my own like shot at that, like your own like IP or whatever, like what would you like to put your own kind of spin on?
Oh my gosh, this is such
Play
a
in that
good
sandbox.
question. And there was literally something the other day that I was like, I want a crack at that. And now I cannot
Mm,
remember what it is. But
this is always
I would say there's a few things that always come to mind. So as I said earlier, I'm a big Patricia Highsmith fan, and I am always impressed by her ability to spin a novel out of something that is just like a feeling. For example, she has this great book called Those Who Walk Away, which is set in Venice. And I think this is like one of the things I would really love a crack at. This novel has absolutely nothing going on. It is like literally a woman commits suicide, and the woman's father shows up in Venice to hunt down the widowed husband because he believes that he is responsible for his daughter's death. That's it. There's no resolution. There's nothing else. All they do is chase each other around Venice for 270 pages, and that's it. It's wild. But I think it has such incredible kind of cinematic quality to it that I would love if I were doing IP. That's, I think, what I would put at the top of my list for a crack at.
Yeah, I think that would be so fun. I want to see that. Let's put that energy out into the world. Like,
yeah, I
that's
have
just got to be like free license now, right? Like,
yeah. And I also have to say, speaking of those things, there's this long short story by Daphne du Maurier called Don't Look Now, which was made into a movie.
The Donald Sutherland.
Yes,
which is crazy.
It's such a great movie.
What story?
While we're talking about Venice and adaptations, I feel like I have to give a shout out to that film, which I watched recently and I watched it then 3 more times every day after that because I was so blown away by how weird it was. Anyways.
It's so unhinged. If you haven't seen Don't Look Now, it's so unhinged. You think you're ready.
So weird.
Or not.
No, so weird, so strange. I went back and reread I guess it's like, it's in between a short story and a novella. Let's say it's a long short story. I went back and reread it. It's as weird. The book is as weird as the movie. And I was just like, this is wild. This is fantastic. Anyway, so my recommendation to is go watch Don't Look Now from the 70s, Donald Sutherland.
Julie Christie.
A
lot of weirdness.
Yeah.
That's why I always say that I would like to do like a retelling or whatever of Suddenly Last Summer because I find the Tennessee Williams play.
Yes.
That one is also incredibly unhinged. And obviously like the most, I think, Southern Gothic of his stuff. So, and that's another movie. If you're looking for something fun to watch and fun, bear in mind who you're getting advice from here. But Suddenly Last Summer, I showed that to my husband and I was like, wherever you think this is going, you're wrong.
Yeah.
Like you have no idea what really happened that summer. And he was like, I will be damned. I did not have any idea. Which I think is a great kind of way to end this with like, I think both of us are really, I think embracing the weird in our books. And I think that readers like, I feel like they'll follow you if you go with confidence to some weird places or to like a little bit, the genre mashup or anything like that, like they'll follow, like if they trust in your weirdness.
I think you're right too, Rachel. You said earlier that you have to write the books that we want to read as readers, because if you chase something else, it never works. And I think you have to just, for me, I love so much going deep into other writers' backlists and seeing that they're working through the same questions in every novel. I mean, if you read, Patricia Highsmith wrote a lot of books. Not all of them are fantastic. Some of them you're like, there's nothing here, but it's still fascinating because she's always working on the same set of questions. And I find that really fascinating as a reader as well as a writer.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think that is the perfect place to close out this fabulous chat that we have had this afternoon. Thank you so much for joining this event. It has been the most fun. Thank you so much for everybody who came. We had over 100 people hanging out on a Tuesday afternoon with us, which is amazing. And it's all a testament, I think, to Katy, how people are so excited for this book because, and you're right to be, I'm telling you, it's so much fun. You're going to have a ball this summer with it.
Thanks so much, Rachel. I am so happy that we had a chance to meet virtually.
Absolutely. And we'll have to do it in person one of these days.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody. And of course, you can get your copy of Saltwater from your local Barnes and Noble. And there'll be links in this as well. So go forth and read. You're going to have a good time. Thank you, everybody. See you later.
Everyone.